The crying of the old house. That was only 2 weeks after I lived in a second-hand property. I was allowed to live in a 40-year-old house for 50,000 yen a month by a relative. My relative, who was worried about the expenses for management, property management, etc. after the liquidation of his estate, listed the old house for sale at a local real estate agency, but he could not find a buyer even after 3 years. I thought it would be a better deal than renting, since it was within a 20-minute drive from my office and I was spending 80,000 a month on rent. The house was an old house, but it was a 2-story house with a small garden. The amount of money I would save by not having to worry about neighbor problems and noise would be more than enough for 5 years. The actual living space would be 2 rooms on the first floor, and the second floor could be used for storage. I even thought that I could buy this house and remodel it in the future if I like it that much. Or, it would be fun to do DIY by myself. So one day, 2 days after I moved into my relative's old house, I was living in the house. When I returned home after work, I felt a strong sense of discomfort even though I was at my front door. I had a sixth sense, or perhaps it was an unidentifiable presence, and I felt goosebumps crawling on my skin. However, there was no progress if I kept walking around outside, so I went into the house with all my might. I look down the quiet, lights-out hallway and see my wife, who has not changed much since before I left, and then look up the stairs to the second floor. Naturally, there was no way I could see what was at the far end of the pitch darkness, so I finally turned on the light. I guess living alone in a house makes you timid in your own way. I told myself that I must be missing people, and finished my dinner alone tonight, heating up ready-made lunch boxes and side dishes in the microwave and watching a TV program. The only mistake I made was that I should have previewed the bathroom. The floor was cold, the drainage was poor, and there was even a draft in the bathroom. Once I got out to soak in the bathtub, I was sure I would freeze in no time. As I soaked in the bathtub and exhaled heavily with such regrets, I heard a slight sound that was neither loud nor small, just really described as a thud of some kind. Was someone somewhere closing a car door? Or perhaps something heavy had been dropped on the floor. At the time, I had no idea that the sound was coming from inside the house. 4 days after I started living in this house, I still felt strange stares when I came home. And on this particular day, as I was dozing off in the room I was using as my living room, I was awakened by the sound of something dragging Zuri. Zuri, what was that sound? How I listened carefully, and I heard a cat meow from somewhere, the kind of cat meow you hear during mating season. Just after I heard a short cry, the sound of something being dragged had disappeared, so I gave a big sigh and headed for the bathroom to get ready for bed. Again, it was a modest structure with only an old washbasin and an exposed mirror on the wall, and it was enough to make me reconsider remodeling the whole place when I finally got to live there. Well, it's cheap enough that we can save money. As I was immersed in brushing my teeth, my eyes suddenly fell on the mirror. In the center of the corridor, there is a washroom with only a wooden beam attached to it, which is not separated from the corridor, and is located at the convex point of the Chinese characters. The bathroom is not separated from the hallway by a central wooden beam, but is located on the convex ledge of the Chinese characters, with the bathroom and toilet on either side of it. As I looked at the dimly lit hallway through the mirror, I heard that sound. It sounded as if something was being dragged. What on earth is this sound? I raise my eyebrows at the inexplicable sound that I hear from time to time, though not every day or night. And then, as if in resonance with the inexplicable sound, I hear the meow of a cat. As I cough with a wry smile, thinking that if it is this lively, I will not be lonely, and incidentally wash my face and wipe it with a towel, I feel an intense gaze on my back that seems to pierce some kind of hole, and I am unable to move as I stand upright. The dragging and catcalls are continually heard. No, it is probably not my imagination that I feel that I am getting a little bit closer. I only move my gaze and look into the mirror in front of me. I look at the mirror in front of me. In the corner of the mirror, at the foot of the hallway in my background, I see something stirring, and I am startled. It looks like a small lump, and although I can see that it is small and quadrupedal like a cat, I cannot see the full extent of it because it is surrounded by a kind of pitch-black haze that assimilates with the dimly lit corridor. Oh, ooh. The small object gradually approaches my feet and extends what looks like a hand. I meditated as quickly as I could and began chanting a hazy sutra in my slurred tongue. Then, after about 5 minutes of chanting the sutra, I noticed that the small object had disappeared, as the sutra had a certain effect, and my gaze gradually moved away from it. I was belatedly convinced that the property had a story to tell. Once I knew that, I immediately called my relatives the next day. "Oh, uncle. I'd like to confirm something about the house, is that all right?" "What's wrong? What's wrong?" I thought I was cleaning up and taking care of the yard. I told him the naked story of what I had experienced in just less than a week since I had moved in. I could imagine that my relative's uncle wrinkled his brow during the process, as if he was wondering over the phone, but I felt that he was mature enough to listen to me, quietly ministering to me until I finished my story. Then, when he finished listening to my experience, he interrupted with a low groan, and then awkwardly opened his mouth. "I know you're not the kind of person who tells lies, but I just can't believe it. I lived there when I was young, too, and those things never happened to me." Slightly discouraged by my uncle's words, I listened. "But you know, if there really is an apparition, I, as the landlord, have to check it out. I'll go see them this weekend." To my surprise, he told me that he was coming to stay the weekend to investigate psychic phenomena. As for me, it was a great help, since I was alone and had no immediate destination to move to, but the reality of spending a little less than a week alone weighed heavily on me. The psychic phenomena continued until the day of my appointment with my uncle. It was always after nighttime, especially when I fell asleep or washed my face, and I heard many voices. However, since then, I have been taking countermeasures such as always leaving the lights on in my living space, so it is fortunate that I never witnessed the object at that time. On the appointed day, when I returned home from work, a phone call came in, and when I answered it, the uncle informed me that he was coming to my house now. I had bought steak and snacks on my way home from work, so food was no problem, but I waited for his arrival with a small question in my mind: where was he going to sleep? After a short wait, the chime rang and the uncle arrived. He said, "Oh no, I'm sorry. I've decided to stay here." No, I'm sorry too." After the polite greeting, I took him into the living room and gave him a detailed report of what had happened so far. He wrote down in his notebook the places where he had heard voices and seen mysterious objects, and immediately began to search the house. First, 2 adults inspect the hallway where the meowing is often heard. The floor creaked, but there was no cat-like meow, so the cause was not the floor. The uncle, wondering if a cat had taken up residence under the floor, changed into his shoes and went outside. He shined his flashlight and peeked under the floor, but there was no shadow of an animal that seemed to be there. Thinking that the cause might be the deteriorated condition of the walls and the sound of a draft passing through, he headed for the bathroom, but of course such a sound would not be made just because the construction had deteriorated. Finally, he came to the washroom to think about the identity of the mysterious object that is also the main subject of this case. I stepped on the assumption that maybe the squeak was an animal taking up residence, but when it comes to this mysterious object, the uncle traces a note inscribed in his notebook with his finger and gives a dubious look. Not like a stray got in or something? No, the front door was closed, and it didn't look like a cat or a raccoon dog to begin with. I could be sure that it was a quadruped, but for the life of me, I couldn't make out the haze and couldn't come up with a metaphor for what kind of animal it was close to. Yes, not an animal like a cat or a dog, but a silhouette of a more familiar creature. It's cold, so let's go back to the living room for the moment. If we take it easy, we might hear that strange mewing sound. I understand. I lead him into the living room and spread out the sake and snacks I had prepared on the kotatsu table, which also serves as a table. As I had guessed, he was quite a drinker. He was delighted. Any ready-made food at the supermarket these days is delicious. We exchanged some small talk, and before we knew it, we had fallen asleep, having completely forgotten our purpose and feeling like we were having a small party. In the darkness, only the TV was twinkling, and I could see my uncle sleeping in the kotatsu, snoring on his back. I crawled out of the kotatsu and headed for the bathroom, my body trembling from the urge to urinate. When I went out into the hallway and turned on the light, I wondered why the light was off, but I thought it might have been turned off by my uncle, so I went straight into the bathroom to do my business. After I finished defecating, I was about to stop by the washroom to rinse my face when I began to hear the cries of the man in question. It was that voice. I stopped to listen carefully and tried to locate where the voice was coming from. I stopped to listen and try to locate where it is coming from. I hold my breath, put my hands over my ears, and look around me. I turn my ear in the direction where I hear it more clearly than before. Along with the squealing, I also heard the sound of something dragging in the example. The source of the sound was getting closer. As I approached the sound, I realized that the sound was coming from the living room. However, my uncle was sleeping in the living room, and the TV was supposed to be on. I tilted my head at the inexplicable situation where I could not hear any sound from the TV. Then I heard a happy baby's voice coming from the living room. Yes, it was a baby crying. I looked up with a start, realizing that what I had thought was a cat's meow was a baby's cry. No wonder it sounded familiar. If that was the sound of a baby crying, then the small object I saw in the mirror at that time was. I had a nasty imagination, but I shook my head to erase the image in my brain that I had created myself. I shook my head to erase the image in my mind, but the baby's crying sound coming from the living room meant that a small object existed in the room where my uncle was. I returned to the living room, my body trembling with fear, but I regret my return. With only the hallway light and the weak light from the TV illuminating the living room, the sight of a small object crawling near the kotatsu caught my attention. The object, with 4 reddish-black limbs bent like rubber and moving like oars, was moving forward with its head, which was unnaturally large for a baby, in command. At the destination of the object, a small, shivering man was crouching by a dead-end window, stifling his voice and saying in a frightened voice, "Cuckoo, don't come." I quickly shouted, "Are you all right?" I shouted in a hoarse voice, "Are you all right?" But that was a bad move, as the object stopped moving forward and turned around. The object changed its target to me and crawled toward me, eventually coming within range of the hallway light, and I had the misfortune to see it clearly. The main body, with 4 reddish-black arms and legs, had a torso as small as a baby's, and the facial parts embedded in its head appeared to be full of smiles, with its cloudy white eyes fully open and the corners of its closed mouth raised like a U in the Roman alphabet. I backed away and sat down, leaning against the corridor wall out of fear. But as the baby crawled to my feet, he let out a small ah, as if spoiled, and grabbed the hem of my pants. Then, once I thought she was lying face down, she suddenly scrambled up my body and pressed her face against mine with a big smile on her face.
"Mommy."
I hugged him. I realized that I had spent the night in the hallway and woke up in the chilly early morning sun. Suddenly I remembered last night's baby and jumped up, but was puzzled to find no trace of him on my clothes or body. I remembered my uncle and checked the living room to see if he, like me, had passed out and was lying limp on the windowsill. I knocked him awake and he woke up and said, ah. He was jumping up and down. I then explained that I had passed out last night and when I came to, it was morning, and he said the obvious, I might have passed out too. After that, we washed our faces and got ourselves back on track. We talked about the baby while eating the leftovers from last night's meal. I knew that he had seen the baby, too. According to the uncle, after drinking too much alcohol and falling asleep, he was awakened by a strange squeaking sound. When he opened his eyes, the lights were off and he was lying down in the kotatsu, looking around, when he saw a small object in the corner of his eye. When he realized that it was approaching him, he sat up and stared at it to see what it was, but as soon as he realized it was the baby, he almost had a stroke. Unfortunately, he was unable to pass out on the spot, and the baby came close to him, screaming happily as if excited. That is how the uncle was trembling at the window. Then I came back from the bathroom and that's when you saw me. I was scared. The uncle said so, but he had been emptying cans of beer all morning. In the end, I never found out what that baby was. My uncle arranged for me to move out of the old house and stay with him for a while. During that time, my uncle consulted with the priest and the Shinto priest through his acquaintances, but he could not find any spiritual disorder in the old house, and it has been a roundabout way of life. Incidentally, I have been living peacefully since I became a nuisance at my uncle's house, without having witnessed the baby or the cries. My uncle also has not brought back any such hauntings, and I have been able to live in peace and quiet, but he said that he feels a strange gaze whenever he visits that old house. When I visited there to pick up my belongings, I also felt a strange stare that still pierced my skin, so I don't even want to go near there for the time being. I don't know why that baby showed up when I moved out, but it was something I never want to experience again. This concludes this story. Thank you for listening to the end.